Hitler was one of the most infamous dictators in history, rising to power in Germany during the early 1930s as leader of the Nazi Party. Born in Austria in 1889, he served in World War I and later capitalized on Germany's post-war chaos to push an ultra-nationalist, racist, and authoritarian agenda. In 1933, he became chancellor, and soon after transformed the Weimar Republic into a totalitarian Nazi state. Hitler launched World War II by invading Poland in 1939 and orchestrated the Holocaust, which led to the murder of 6 million Jews along with millions of others. By 1945, the war had turned against him, and Allied forces were closing in on Berlin. On April 30, 1945, realizing defeat was inevitable, Hitler and his woman Eva Braun, whom he had married just the day before, retreated into the Führer bunker beneath Berlin. There they both took their own lives. Hitler shot himself while Braun took cyanide. Their bodies were wrapped in blankets, carried outside, doused in gasoline, and burned by his loyal aides as Soviet troops advanced. Within days, Berlin fell, and Hitler's so-called Thousand-Year Reich ended in total ruin. Stalin, the brutal leader who turned the Soviet Union into a totalitarian superpower, was born in Georgia in 1878 and rose to power after the death of Lenin in 1924, eventually becoming the undisputed dictator of the USSR. A master of political manipulation, Stalin launched a series of 5-year plans to rapidly industrialize the country, but at a horrific cost. Millions died from forced collectivization, famine, and purges. During the Great Terror of the 1930s, he ordered the arrest, torture, and execution of countless perceived enemies, including old Bolsheviks, military leaders, and ordinary citizens. Despite his iron grip, he played a key role in World War II, eventually defeating Nazi Germany and expanding Soviet influence over Eastern Europe. Paranoid until the end, Stalin distrusted even his closest allies, and by the early 1950s, he was planning yet another purge, this time targeting Jewish doctors in what became known as the Doctors' Plot. But on March 1, 1953, Stalin suffered a massive stroke while alone in his Kuntsevo dacha near Moscow. His guards, too afraid to disturb him, left him lying unconscious for hours. When doctors finally arrived the next day, it was too late. He died on March 5th, officially from a cerebral hemorrhage. His death sparked both mourning and quiet relief across the USSR. Though initially embalmed and displayed beside Lenin, Stalin's body was quietly removed from the mausoleum in 1961 during de-Stalinization and buried near the Kremlin wall. Benito Mussolini, the founder of Italian fascism and dictator of Italy from 1922 to 1943, rose to power promising to restore Italy's greatness after World War I. Born in 1883, Mussolini was originally a socialist, but later embraced extreme nationalism and authoritarianism. As Il Duce, he established a totalitarian regime, suppressed opposition, and allied Italy with Nazi Germany during World War II. However, by 1943, with Italy facing military defeats and Allied invasions, Mussolini was removed from power by his own government and arrested. He was rescued by German forces and installed as the puppet leader of the Italian Social Republic in northern Italy. In April 1945, as the Allies and Italian partisans closed in, Mussolini attempted to flee to Switzerland with his girlfriend, Clara Petacci. They were captured near Lake Como by communist partisans and executed on April 28, 1945. Their bodies were taken to Milan, hung upside down in a public square, and subjected to humiliation by enraged citizens, marking a brutal end to the fascist era in Italy. Mao Zedong was the founding father of the People's Republic of China and the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. He was born in 1893 in a rural village and rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most powerful and controversial figures of the 20th century. After leading the communist forces to victory in the Chinese Civil War in 1949, Mao ruled China with an iron fist for nearly 3 decades, pushing radical social and economic campaigns like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. These policies caused widespread famine, social chaos, and the deaths of millions. Despite the devastation, Mao maintained a cult of personality and absolute control over the country. By the early 1970s, his health was declining, but he remained the undisputed leader. On September 9, 1976, Mao died of complications related to Parkinson's disease and respiratory failure in Beijing. Pol Pot was the ruthless leader of the Khmer Rouge and dictator of Cambodia from 1975 to 1979. Pot was born in 1925 and rose to power by leading a radical communist movement that aimed to transform Cambodia into a classless agrarian society. After seizing control, Pol Pot's regime forced millions of people from cities into brutal labor camps, resulting in widespread starvation, torture, and executions. An estimated 2 million Cambodians died during his rule. His reign of terror sought to erase all traces of the old society, targeting intellectuals, professionals, and ethnic minorities. In 1979, Vietnamese forces invaded Cambodia and overthrew Pol Pot's government, forcing him to flee into the jungle, where he continued guerrilla warfare for years. In 1997, after internal power struggles and pressure from rival factions, Pol Pot was placed under house arrest by his own comrades. On April 15, 1998, Pol Pot died, reportedly from a heart attack or possibly poisoning. Details remain unclear, but his death marked the end of one of the most brutal chapters in modern history. Kim Il-sung was the first leader of North Korea and the man who shaped its strict and isolated government. He was born in 1912 and rose to power after fighting against Japanese occupation as a communist guerrilla. In 1948, he established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and ruled with absolute authority for nearly 5 decades. Kim Il-sung created a rigid personality cult, suppressed all opposition, and isolated North Korea from much of the world. He launched the Korean War in 1950, which devastated the peninsula and ended in a stalemate, solidifying the division between North and South Korea. Under his rule, the country developed a command economy and military-first policy, but suffered widespread famine and poverty. By the early 1990s, Kim's health declined, and on July 8, 1994, he died of a heart attack. His death was kept secret for several days, and the regime proclaimed him the eternal president, passing leadership to his son Kim Jong-il. Saddam Hussein, the ruthless dictator of Iraq, rose to power in 1979 and ruled with an iron fist for over 2 decades, using brutal repression to maintain control. Known for his aggressive policies, he led Iraq through wars with Iran and Kuwait and was accused of horrific human rights abuses, including the use of chemical weapons against civilians. After the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq, his regime quickly collapsed, and Saddam went into hiding. He was captured in December 2003, hiding in a small underground bunker, famously called a spider hole. Saddam was put on trial for crimes against humanity, found guilty, and sentenced to death. Despite requesting execution by firing squad, he was hanged on December 30, 2006. Footage of his execution was leaked online. Muammar Gaddafi ruled Libya for over 40 years after taking power in a military coup in 1969 that overthrew the country's monarchy. Born in a Bedouin tent in 1942, Gaddafi established a unique political system based on his own ideology called the Green Book, blending Arab nationalism, socialism, and Islam. He ruled Libya with an iron fist, suppressing dissent, sponsoring international terrorism, and controlling the country's vast oil wealth. In 2011, during the Arab Spring uprisings, a civil war broke out as rebel forces, supported by NATO airstrikes, advanced toward the capital. On October 20, 2011, Gaddafi was captured near his hometown of Sirte while trying to flee. Shortly after, he was killed. Reports say he was beaten and shot by rebel fighters. His death ended his long dictatorship but left Libya in a state of ongoing conflict. Franco ruled Spain as a dictator for nearly 40 years after winning the Spanish Civil War and taking power in 1939. He established a fascist regime that lasted from 1939 until his death. Born in 1892, Franco suppressed opposition, censored the press, and maintained strict control over Spanish society while keeping the country neutral during World War II. By the early 1970s, Franco's health was clearly failing, and he officially named Prince Juan Carlos as his successor in 1969 to ensure a smooth transition. After a long illness, Franco died on November 20, 1975, at the age of 82. His death paved the way for Spain's transition to democracy. Decades later, in 2019, his remains were exhumed from the Valley of the Fallen amid controversy and reburied in a more modest cemetery. Let me know if you'd like part 2. If you liked this video, subscribe to my channel to watch similar ones.